If you pick something from this book, I think we all can read from here. I have a selection, 85. What's the title?
Tell the story.
I love to tell the story. All right.
I did also move the receiver to another location.
Yeah, okay.
All right, I think we're ready. The fact that you're here this afternoon doesn't mean that you're a mental case. But this is a seminar on dealing with depression. And so I know that your time here this afternoon will be well spent, at least in keeping you from becoming a mental case. Dr. Nedley needs no introduction for many of you. He has been here before. He's the president of WEMAR and the founder and medical director of the Depression and, Depression and Anxiety Recovery Programs.
Yeah.
That's what it is. We are so blessed to have him this afternoon, and I don't want to take any more of his time. He's ready to begin. So let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, it is such a privilege and joy to be here this afternoon, to be ministered to by an expert in the mental health area. You know how much we need this ministry in these times. And so thank you for Dr. Nedley's presence with us today. May your Spirit minister through him, that we all may gain that peace that passeth all understanding through Jesus Christ our Lord. In his precious name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. It's good to be with you again this afternoon. We'll see if this... it is plugged in. So what I see there is going to be the second half of this presentation. The first half is a continuation of what we didn't finish this morning, so that we make sure we finish that. And so while we're figuring out the aspect, of course there's several, I think we've got it now. In regards to depression, in order to talk about the same ways that psychologists and psychiatrists, can you hear me? Testing. Now can you hear me? Okay. So as we want to talk about the same aspect and use the same terms that psychiatrists and psychologists use. But depression and anxiety, the way they are diagnosed by the Psychiatric Bible, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, Volume 5, are all based on symptoms. So, in fact, psychiatric diagnoses are that way. You might wonder, what's the difference between neurology and psychiatry? Neurology, those diagnoses are not symptom-based. In other words, they're very objective. In regards to, a particular disorder of this aspect of the brain, and it'll be called this disease. In fact, I used to kind of joke with my fellow neurologists because I always said they had the largest textbook of diagnoses because there's all sorts of neurological disorders. But they had the smallest textbook of neurological therapeutics. In other words, they could diagnose things, but not a lot that could be done after the neurological diagnosis. With psychiatry, however, all of the diagnoses are symptom-based. And that makes it more subjective It's not as objective as the neurological field, but that's the way it is done. And of course, we tend to treat these disorders as being different. For instance, depression is quite a different diagnosis than anxiety, which is different than ADHD, or we might name another psychiatric disorder. And there's a whole lot that we could name, but these are all going to be symptom-based. And as it turns out, as we research these diseases more, we find out that they're not really all that separate. They have common things that bring these symptoms about. And if we can find out what's bringing those symptoms about in that disease, that's when we can actually reverse it and eradicate it through getting it to the core causes. Now, that's where our research has come in. There are over 100 different causes of depression and anxiety. However, they can be categorized into 10 different ways. And we have found the brain's pretty resilient. It can undergo 1 or 2 or 3 of those causes without exhibiting depression, anxiety, or another mental illness. But once you get 4 categories of causes, that's too much for the brain. And that's when depression and anxiety is going to come about. And so our workup involves looking at the core causes that are operative in the individual patient. And of course, those core causes are going to be very different from one individual to another. But once we identify those, then we have things to work with, and then we can eradicate those causes if, and most of the time we can, and then even if we can't eradicate all of them, if we get down to just 1 or 2 causes that are operative, we'll still be able to produce a desired result because the brain can withstand 1 or 2 or 3 categories of causes. So the symptoms of depression, there's over 100 symptoms of depression too, over 100 causes, over 100 symptoms. But there are 9 diagnostic hallmark symptoms. Can anyone identify any of those diagnostic hallmark symptoms? What might be a symptom of depression that could help us with the diagnosis? Okay, so someone mentioned not being able to sleep. Did someone say not being able to eat? Was that one of them? I don't know. I heard something over there. Not being able to, okay, wake up, someone said. And so, yeah, I think we're talking about sleep. Sleep disorders, or I should say, the challenges in regards to sleep. The actual a term that's used in the psychiatric Bible is sleep disturbances. Now, what is the most common sleep disturbance? Insomnia is very common. That's when it's time to go to bed, your head hits pillow, but your brain keeps going, and you're not able to sleep. But that's not actually the most common sleep disorder. What's the most common sleep disturbance? That's right. You're able to go to sleep, but then you wake up too early and can't go back to sleep. We call that early morning awakening. As the depression gets more severe, we tend to wake up earlier. So we might need to be up at 6, we're getting up at 4, can't get back to sleep, and then as the depression gets more severe, we're waking up at 2 in the morning and not being able to go back to sleep. But you can also have a sleep disturbance by, as someone mentioned, not being able to wake up, what we call hypersomnia. Hypersomnia is when we're sleeping too much. Now, what is sleeping too much? How many hours a day is sleeping too much? More than 12, someone says. Yes, that would definitely be sleeping too much. As an adult, if you are sleeping more than 9 hours a day, that's too much. Now, as a child, that wouldn't be too much. You can go up to 10 hours a day for adolescence, and that can be okay. Of course, as an infant, you can do even more than 12 hours a day, and that's healthy. But for For hypersomnia, it's more than 9 hours a day. And hypersomnia is not only a symptom of depression, it's actually not healthy for us. A lot of times people are aware that sleeping not enough is unhealthy. People don't get the idea that sleeping too much is unhealthy, but it actually is. We've had individuals come to our program that are sleeping 20 hours a day. They're barely awake long enough to survive, to be able to stay clean enough and eat enough. And some of those people that have been sleeping 20 hours a day, 3 out of the 4 hours that they're awake, they're directing their family from their bed. And so they're not sleeping, but they're still there in bed directing their family. And so that, of course, is severe depression and one that needs to be treated. The individuals I've talked about, none of them are sleeping that much now. They're all sleeping normally, waking up refreshed, having great productive days as we were able to reverse the underlying causes. So sleep disturbance is one of those 9. What's another one? Okay, appetite change. What's more common? Weight gain or weight loss with depression? Gain is more common, and why is gain more common? Self-medicating with food, and I think we talked about it in the question and answer session. What part of food tends to be eaten more so by depressed individuals? Yeah, it's the high sugary foods. Sugar actually transiently raises your serotonin level, so it not only tastes good, but you actually feel less depressed. It's just a transient, then it goes down after that. That's one of the reasons why we'll never be able to solve the obesity epidemic in our society until we solve the mental health issues behind it. And so that's why Weight Watchers doesn't work for a whole lot of people because it's just talking about calories in and calories out. But if you're trying to self-medicate your mental health, then the calories don't become all that important to you anymore. And so that's one of the reasons why we have this obesity epidemic. But you can also get anorexia and weight loss. And that tends to come about particularly if it's associated with anxiety or also if it's sudden and severe onset. So those are 2 symptoms. We have 7 more to go. What was that? Lethargic, yes. Fatigue. This is where you don't have the energy. You wake up in the morning, you either don't have you don't have enough energy or you run out of energy. If you do have it, you run out of energy too quick in the daytime. So that would be a third. What would be a fourth? Hoarding is a symptom of depression and anxiety, but it's not a diagnostic hallmark symptom. So it's not listed in the psychiatric Bible as a diagnostic hallmark symptom. Socially withdrawn. It's socially withdrawn is connected to one of the diagnostic hallmark symptoms, which is apathy. This is where you wake up in the morning and you're not excited about the day. You get up out of a sense of duty and responsibility, or just because you can't sleep anymore, but not because you're interested in the day. And that's distinctly abnormal. Now that can happen once in a great while to any of us, but if it happens on a regular basis, the majority of the time for the last 2 weeks, in fact, all these symptoms are based on 2 weeks' worth the majority of the time. So if you have it the majority of the time for the last 2 weeks, that's distinctly abnormal. And it can get so profound, that apathy, that you don't even want to get out of your own house. And if someone convinces you to go to a new restaurant because you think you'll like it, or they think you'll like it, come on, the family's coming out, why go to this restaurant? If that person does go out and go to the restaurant to appease the rest of the family, what do you think they're thinking while they're there? I want out of here and I want back home. We had an individual come to our program that had not been out of her house for 4.5 years. And the first time out of her house was at our program. Her daughter, fortunately, she was close by, but her daughter drove her to our program, and that was the first time out of her house in 4.5 years. She did agree to get treated for depression. And fortunately, since that program, she's been out of her house every day since. And she has not been stuck in her house. So we've done, what's that?
Inability to think.
Yeah, inability to focus. Yep, that's another one. So lack of focus and concentration. This will, you can notice this if you're reading something and you get to the bottom of the page and you forgot what was at the top of the page. And so you have to go back and read it again. And then it might even happen again the second time you get through. And it's like, I missed it again. So that's significant lack of focus and concentration. And that is a prominent symptom for both depression and anxiety. By the way, some of these are prominent symptoms for anxiety. The sleep disorder. Now, hypersomnia is not part of anxiety, but insomnia and early morning awakening can be. And also the lack of focus and concentration can be both depression and anxiety. And you can even start thinking that you're experiencing dementia. And we've had some profound cases. One just last year, we had an 81-year-old female, wife of a prominent physician, and she had been to the neurologist and top neurologists and been diagnosed with dementia, neurological diagnosis. And I think he had heard of another case. We actually had a woman in her early 50s that was diagnosed with early Alzheimer's. Had to lose her job, all of that. She couldn't remember anything. And even when she started our program, she couldn't remember what room she was in. We had to lead her to the room. But we don't take dementia patients in our program if it's due to things that are not related to mental health. But in her case, there was enough evidence that this was not Alzheimer's dementia. It was misdiagnosed, and it was actually due to severe depression. And sure enough, as her depression cleared up, her dementia started clearing up, and within 4 months, she was back employed again and back with her family and all of the things that had caused the dementia, which was the severe depression, had been eradicated at that point. It had been overturned. And the same thing happened with this 81-year-old woman. So it took some time, more than just the 10 days. They first did the 10 days there. We found some issues in regards to her epigenetics that we are also working on. And I just got a phone call from her last week. Her mind is just as fresh and as sharp as can be, and her husband was all thrilled and said, there is no signs of dementia anywhere. Her mind is as sharp as can be. And it was actually due to depression that she had been misdiagnosed with Alzheimer's. So lack of focus is a big one. All right, we haven't gone through all 9 of them yet. What are...
Thoughts of being suicide. Dead.
Yes. So one said suicide, thoughts of being better off dead. The Psychiatric Bible encompasses those thoughts under morbid thoughts. So morbid thoughts are thoughts that you'd be better off dead, or it might just be that you're preoccupied with death or symbols of death. And so people will tattoo symbols of death on themselves. That's a sign of morbid thoughts. Although they actually want to buy some sort of morbid relic, some sort of sliced up arm in a glass dish with formaldehyde in it or something, and that's morbid thoughts. And of course, cutting, those sorts of things, the morbid aspect of it can qualify under that aspect of things. I don't think we've ever had a program where we don't have a cutter, at least one cutter. Many people self-mutilate as a form of self-medicating, actually, for their depression and anxiety. But we've encompassed the majority of them. We still have a few left. What's another symptom of depression?
Taking drugs, overdoses.
Yeah, taking drugs, overdosing, that's related to another diagnostic hallmark symptom. They don't actually say that as a diagnostic hallmark symptom, but the feeling down, depressed, hopeless. In fact, most people, when they say, I feel depressed, they mean they're feeling down and they're having deep sadness. But that deep sadness and depression can lead them then to, do risky things like take drugs. I either want to feel better or I want to die. And so we have a lot of opioid deaths in this country, over 100,000 last year. From people taking drugs and dying as a result of those drugs. And those aren't the ones that, had left any suicide note, or it's not a definite suicide. If we would add those to the suicide list, it'd be a lot more. There's about 50,000 suicides in this country every year. And so you can see how much it would add to that. But it nonetheless is risky behavior. And even young people can get into risky behavior. In fact, I was just asked the other day to comment. Some news organizations and health journals asked me to comment on things related to mental health. And so I was asked to comment about extreme sports for this health journal. And is there something going on? Extreme sports would be like, where you're jumping off of a mountain in one of these flying suits, and then trying to land safely and those sorts of things. You're seeing a lot of that crop up, and that actually is a form of self-medication for depression. In other words, it's trying to get their adrenaline levels up and get them excited about something, and then if they make it, great, at least they'll feel better that they've accomplished this, and if they die in the process, then they don't feel it's any big deal. Interestingly, a couple of years ago, fortunately I wasn't there with a number of depressed people, but we do take our depression people after they start getting better on a beautiful hike along the American River there in Weimar. And it's a river canyon, one of the most very beautiful spot. But they have an old railroad bridge that's now just a hiking bridge over, and there's some big rock cliffs that come up almost to underneath this bridge, and there was a kid on it that was getting ready to jump from that rock down into the river. And he was really focused, and he had these little thin shoes on. And as soon as I saw what he was thinking of doing, I actually tried to talk him out of it. And I said, sir, don't jump. It's not worth it. You don't have to to do that to prove anything, etc. His sister was there watching, and his brother, older brother, was there watching. And he didn't listen, and he jumped. But he survived the jump and didn't get injured. And it wasn't till a year later, when he was seeing mental health providers in the local area, that he wasn't responding to the medication and those sorts of things, that he got referred to our program. And so I actually saw him again face to face as he was coming through our program. And he did a great job in the program. He complied. His depression is over with. But I didn't have any idea at that time that I would actually see him as a patient. But he actually did it, he told me, as a dare from his older brother, because his brother had done it, and he wanted to prove something. And so he was doing it as a dare. But part of that whole dare aspect of things was the fact that he had significant depression. And so it was a form of self-medicating. All right, so we covered the deep sadness, we covered apathy, we covered fatigue, we covered sleep, we covered appetite, we covered focus, we covered morbid thoughts. I think we've got a couple more. Overwork? That can be one of the symptoms of depression, a form of self-medicating, particularly when it's your family that makes you depressed when you come home. And so, that's not one of the diagnostic hallmark symptoms. However, one of them is, speaking of family, is an increase in irritability. So if you're more agitated or irritable than you used to be, that is a symptom of depression. It can also be a symptom of anxiety as well. And did we cover all 9?
One more.
There's one more. So what is the one more? I might have to get out the list myself. We might have covered. Fear is the anxiety part of things. So tomorrow we're going to talk about anxiety in the afternoon. But fear is present with anxiety. And so depressed people that are just purely depressed and not anxious, they don't have as much fear as they should of the future, per se. And so they're more living in the present, but that's that aspect of things. So
it was anhedonia, one of them that you mentioned?
yeah, anhedonia is the apathy aspect of things. So what's that?
Feeling like a failure.
Feeling like a failure, yes. So, feeling like you have let yourself down, or let your family down, or let people down around you, that is a diagnostic hallmark symptom of depression as well. And along with that feeling of failure is the 9th one as well, and it's feelings of. Anyone know what that word is? Starts with a W. Worthlessness. Feelings of worthlessness. And by the way, those are the 2 hallmark symptoms of severity of depression, is the morbid thoughts and the feelings of worthlessness. And people that feel worthless will be convinced that they actually are. And of course, if they have any ability to be of use to themselves or others, they're certainly not worthless. So that also helps you to understand that with depression comes irrational thoughts. It's those irrational thoughts that actually make them feel that they are worthless, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But I did want to, we covered one primary story today in the Bible, and I wanted, and that was the distortion of magnification and minimization. But I also wanted to go through another very common distortion called emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is that your feelings don't lie. In other words, if I feel overwhelmed and helpless, that means my problems are impossible to solve. Is that true? Because I feel overwhelmed and helpless, my problems are impossible to solve? No. But that's all the evidence a person with emotional reasoning needs. It can also go like this. I'm angry at you, and that proves that you've been cruel and insensitive to me. Does that prove you've been cruel and insensitive because I'm angry at you? No, but if you're an emotional reasoner, that's all the reasoning you need. And it can get to and there's other varieties of it. I feel like I'm fat, therefore I am fat. Now that could be an anorexia nervosa patient who is dangerously thin. We call that a disorder of assumption. Disorders of assumption are at an all-time high today. So if someone says that when they look in the mirror, they see themselves as fat, but yet they're dangerously thin, is the solution to that to tell them that they actually are fat? No. Why would that not be the solution? You could actually kill them. You could actually kill them with that advice and affirm them in their identity of being fat. And so today we have a lot of disorders of assumption that are unfortunately being treated that way, and the world doesn't understand that you don't affirm someone in a distorted belief. It might make them feel better short term, but it's going to make them far worse long term. And so what you do when you have someone with those disorders of assumption, when you have a real skilled team like our team will do, is in a private meeting with a cognitive behavioral therapist, there will be a discussion like, what evidence is there that your assumption is true? What evidence is there that your assumption is not true? And we go through all of that, and then when they look at the weight of the evidence, it's very clear that they're actually thinking distortedly. And they themselves recognize it. But you have to have a therapist that knows how to be able to get to the core aspect of things and help them be able to discover all of this themselves. And so we've had individuals walk out with a big smile out of that cognitive behavioral therapist meeting, saying, you know, even though I'm a cis female, CIS, that's the term that's used in the gender studies today. A cis female means that you're a biological female. We had one in our program recently. We have them in every program, these disorders of assumption. But when the evidence was there, what evidence is there that you're a male? Because she thought she was actually a male and was identifying as a male. And it came forward because of the fact that she liked athletics and she liked to try to keep up with the guys when they would mountain climb, and she would, you know, there was other things that she thought were more male aspect. Of course, if you get on the internet and search those things, the internet, the technology companies are all over the distorted ways of thinking on this and affirming people in their distorted ways of thinking. All 10 technology companies actually will come together on that, and even TikTok from China will really steer people in that direction. So if people start questioning their gender and then start getting on the internet to get answers, they're gonna get worse. And so this girl had done that. And so then when she went through, what are the evidences that you are a female? Well, I have periods, I have this, I have that, are there any behavioral aspects? Well, yes, this and that and whatever. And so her sheet was super long in regards to evidences that she was a female. It was about this long that evidences that she was a male. And so the therapist said, so where is the weight of the evidence? And she looked at that, and she looked at it, and studied it, and then she started smiling, and she goes, I really am a female. I am a female. And she was actually happy, because she had been told that she wasn't and had to go with what her identity was based on a few different items. But she came out of there a happy girl. And she came out of the program with her depression lifted as a result of accurate ways of thinking. So that's under the category of emotional reasoning. I feel this way, therefore I am this way. And of course it can go the other way. I feel on top of the world, therefore I am invincible. Does that mean you're invincible because you feel on top of the world? Absolutely not. And if you think you are, you're going to run into some significant problems. So with emotional reasoning being so prominent in our society today, and by the way, emotional reasoners look for quick fix ways to try to help their emotions get better when they're not that way. So the drug culture is very much emotional reasoning. We have an example in Scripture of a major emotional reasoner that actually had high IQ. His name was Solomon. I said in mine heart, go to now, I'll prove thee with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. And he goes into the things, if he would see someone else doing fun things, he wanted to do it too. So he got into alcohol. He got into the opium and the drugs of his day. And then he got into something that has a drug-like effect. Whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. What is Solomon speaking about there? Yeah. What do we call that today when you're looking at things? It's called pornography. And in his case, it was live pornography. Where did it lead him? Therefore, I what? Hated life for all its vanity and vexation of spirit. Therefore, I went about to cause my heart to despair. Ellen White comments on Solomon, says, many envied the popularity and abundant glory of Solomon, thinking that of all men, he must be the what? The most happy. But amid all that glory of artificial display, the man envied is the one to be most pitied. His countenance is dark with despair. All the splendor about him is but a mockery of the distress and anguish of his thoughts as he reviews his misspent life in seeking for happiness through how? Indulgence and selfish gratification of every desire. You know, we have more fun things to do than ever before in human history, but yet we have more deep depression than ever before in human history. And many of these things that attract young people, that this is going to be fun on the surface, end up causing all sorts of emotional issues. By his own bitter experience, Solomon learned the emptiness of a life that seeks in earthly things its highest good. Gloomy and soul-harassing thoughts troubled him night and day. For him, there was no longer any joy of life. If you don't have any joy of life, what do you have? Depression. Nor peace of mind. If you don't have any peace of mind, what do you have? Anxiety. And the future was dark with despair. So Solomon went into what a lot of people do today. They go into false ways of altering the way you feel. And the problem is you can never get enough of what you don't need. One woman was not enough. 30 wives were not enough. 300 wives were not enough. 700 concubines were not enough. You can never get enough of what? What you don't need. And why is that? Because what you don't need will never satisfy you. And so a lot of times people think, if I just do this enough, I'll finally get enough. I'll finally get enough, and then I'll be satisfied, and I won't need any more. But it's not true. You can never get enough of what you don't need. Last night I was talking to a person who was kind of in a desperate way because of the anxiety, and started to go through the story, and now also significant depression as a result of the story. But what was helping her before was no longer helping her, and that was Xanax, these benzodiazepines. And you know, I'm only taking 1 milligram a day. 1 milligram is a lot of Xanax. It didn't start out that way. 1/4 milligram, then going up further, and now the anxiety is worse than it's ever been. But yet you try to live a day without Xanax, and now your anxiety is tenfold worse. And with all the different issues going on, this is a clear case of someone who needs the residential program. Because you can't get off Xanax on your own when you're taking that much, particularly if you're already anxious and the anxiety is out of control. So we get quite a few people that come through our program. And as I mentioned, we just ended a program And we had, well, I'll show you tomorrow on the anxiety thing. You'll see the results. But amazingly, what happens as we start taking care of the underlying issues and finding those causes, those 10 categories of causes, and reversing them, they'll not only be able to get off their Xanax and be benzo-free, but their anxiety will also get better in the process. And so it doesn't get worse. A lot of times, oh boy, I'm going to go there and get off my Xanax. I need to get ready. I'm going to get worse and worse. No, you won't. But it requires a residential program. You have to have all that support to help you. Pornography exposure after 6 weeks. This was a study actually done by the University of Indiana, one of the reasons why we brought it up here, and also the University of Wisconsin. Both of them teamed up to do this study. And it was a study that was done pre-internet. They say today that this study could not be done now. Why couldn't it be done now? Because they took 300 college men and women who had never been exposed to pornography and randomized them to be willing to be exposed. And if they were willing to be exposed, they would either randomize to be exposed or not exposed, and then compared with another group who wouldn't be exposed for 6 weeks. The reason why they don't think that study can be done today, in fact, some people criticize and say, well, how come you're not quoting recent studies? Sometimes those studies can't be done because they can't find 300 young people that haven't been exposed to pornography today in college because it's so widespread. But notice what happened in 6 weeks. Less interested and less attracted to their partner if they had one. More self-absorbed. Anxiety, what happens to anxiety? It goes up. Less empathy for others around them. Diminished ability to foresee consequences. If you have a diminished ability to foresee consequences, what part of your brain is being depressed here? It's the frontal lobe. And began to live in a very self-centered world and shut down emotionally. In just what period of time? 6 weeks. Dr. Zillman from Indiana University said the negative effects of pornography on emotional intelligence have been more consistently proven than the links between smoking and lung cancer. Now, he's not saying that because the weeks between smoking and lung cancer are weak. We know cigarette smoking causes lung cancer, but there's something that's even stronger, and that is the effects of pornography on emotional intelligence. Dr. Starts with a B, and I'm trying to think of his name, Bauer. Dr. Bauer from Southern Adventist University did some research on very scholarly research. He teaches in the religion department there. And sometimes this scholarly research, I should say this isn't mentioned. If you remember, there were several things in the Mosaic laws that are not necessarily listed in the Ten Commandments that the apostles said need to be continued. Was circumcision one of them? No. Circumcision was not one of them. Do you remember what the three were? There were 3 areas. In Acts 15, they had the Jerusalem Council. Yes. So 2 of them had to do with diet. And the third one had to do with the translation. If you look at the translation of the term fornication, it's translated virtually always in the New English translations as sexual immorality. So these were the laws about sexual immorality in the book of Leviticus. And those laws were read every year. In his research, he found out they were read out loud every year to every man, woman, and child on the afternoon of the Day of Atonement. So after the whole clean aspect of things, of the sanctuary being cleaned, in order to try to keep it clean as well, there were these Levitical laws that were read. And it was being read, you are not to view your niece naked. nor is this person to view whatever. There was the whole aspect of being clothed, even in families, a sort of thing. Now, it wasn't talking about marriage, intimate partners, but outside, essentially, anyone who's not part of that marriage, intimate partner, you weren't even supposed to view them, per se. And of course, there are reasons for that, but he thinks, and he's made a strong case, that if this would be read in our churches every year and to society every year, then when the 4 or 5 year old has uncle come in and try to do some things, that 4 or 5 year old's going to know right away, I heard about this. This isn't right. And often the 4 or 5 year old has no idea about it. No one's ever taught her or taught him. And so it seems strange, but again, you don't know about it until years later, and then we hear about it when they're 18 in depression and anxiety recovery and all the things that happened and all of those sorts of things. And so, but yet the secular studies show that this is a major issue. If we treated this with all the mental health problems that came across, pornography should be illegal. It is illegal if you were to walk into this building naked. You would actually be taken out by police and put in jail. So why is it that you can take a picture of yourself in all sorts of angles naked and post it for everybody to see on the internet, and it's somehow legal? We've really gotten warped in our society, and this should be clearly illegal. By the way, one country has made it illegal. And by the way, they have had some good things happen in that country lately. But it was the country of Iceland. Iceland made pornography illegal. And Louis Torres was there 3 weeks ago. There were over 50 people baptized in Iceland. The president of the conference said he had never seen more than one baptism the entire year in the whole country of Adventism. For year after year. Not only were 50 baptized, but there's another 100 coming to church that are not Adventists that are very interested. The frontal lobes are starting to clear up. Emotional health is starting to improve as a result of at least that not being widely available. One of the main characteristics of virtually all depressed individuals, no matter what the underlying cause, is a significant decrease in the frontal lobe's blood flow and activity, which is what pornography will do, as well as other things. Notice the scan of the depressed patient. This is the same patient now after they've recovered from depression. The biggest before and after difference is right there in the top of the brain. It's like a Doppler weather radar. And that is the frontal lobe. The gray matter of the frontal lobe is working well. And this is why we do things such as music therapy and taking away their phones and devices and things like this that will suppress that area, and taking away even some of the music that has this role to play. James says no one should say God tempts, because God doesn't tempt anyone. Each one is tempted when he is dragged away and enticed by his own what? Evil feelings. But the problem is, feelings can lie. And so when our feelings start lying to us, what can we do? Jonathan Martinson says, feelings are much like waves. We can't stop them from coming, but we can choose which one to surf. How do we choose the one to surf? The one that's based on truth and accuracy and is consistent with God's word. Thomas Jefferson said something profound about emotional reasoning. He said, don't bite at the bait of pleasure until you are sure there is no hook beneath. Can you imagine all the problems society would solve if they just stuck to that? Don't ever bite at the bait of pleasure till you are sure there is no hook beneath. And so emotional reasoners can overcome their emotional reasoning. and what a difference it can make. By the way, speaking of well, maybe I'll wait for another session on that. Story number 3. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might, and said, "It is enough, O Lord, take away my life." Who was this? That was Elijah. And his depression, by the way, was he like Solomon, where he's out there just doing a lot of fun things and self-indulgence? No. Was he like Saul, who had developed an arrogant sense of self? No. Saul was a good man. He was connected with God, but yet he experienced severe major depression. So everyone has different reasons for their depression, but just because you have depression does not mean that you're not in a saving relationship with the Lord. But it does mean there's something that's going on that could be fixed. And if you remember the story of Elijah being a very good man, and then the Mount Carmel experience, where God made it very clear to anyone who was willing to be objective about where the Lord was at and who he was working through. But Jezebel got so hot over her 450 prophets that had been slaughtered, that were personal friends of hers, that she said, "I'm going to find this Elijah. We know where he's at now, and he's going to be a dead man after I find him." And she promised she would find him within 24 hours. Well, the word came to Elijah, what Jezebel said. And what did Elijah do? Without praying, he took off running for his life. And he ran for 30 days. And then he said this. He ran to save his life, but now he wanted God to take his life. He wanted to die. And the angel came, and there were some things before that angel came. He needed to have some good nutrition. The angel came and fed him some food. I think there was some flaxseed in that meal, and some omega-3s, and tryptophan, and tyrosine, and some of the things we'll talk about with diet. He also was in this cave. He wanted to be in the dark. He wanted to be isolated. And God kept doing things to get him out of that cave. You need the light. You need the light. Get out in the light. Get your eyes to see the light. And of course, exercise was part of it. But finally, it was the cognitive behavioral therapy. What doest thou here? And Elijah began to talk. And it became clear that he was actually thinking a distorted thought as well. Even righteous people can think distorted thoughts. And his distorted thought was that of overgeneralization. Now, to generalize is part of IQ. So when you take an IQ test, they'll measure your ability to generalize. But if you're good at generalizing, sometimes you have a tendency to overgeneralize, which is holding the hypothesis as a fact rather than a hypothesis, or generalizing from too few instances. What it precisely is using limited factual evidence to hold a firm belief that actually is not true. And by the way, there's a lot of high IQ people that do that in regards to macroevolutionary theory. They're using limited factual evidence to hold a firm belief that actually is not true. And it's really limited evidence, and there's a lot of evidence that goes against that. What was Elijah's overgeneralization? Do you remember?
Everybody is against me.
Yeah, and I'm the only one that has now bowed the knee to Baal. Now, the first time he said it, God let him get by with it. The angel let him get by. He was letting him talk. But the second time he said it, the angel stopped him and said, Elijah, you're wrong. You're wrong by a factor of what? 7,000. Now, how could he have been more right not knowing about the 7,000? He could have at least said, I'm the only one I know of. But instead, he just knew he was the only one. By the way, Peter got into overgeneralization too. Peter thought if you were a Gentile, it wasn't worth sharing the gospel with you. And the Lord had to give him a significant dream to get him over that overgeneralization. Paul thought if you were a Christian, you deserved to die just by being a Christian. Severe overgeneralization. So Elijah was then told, after his cognitive distortions were corrected, told to do 3 things he did not want to do. We won't go into those 3 things, but I can tell you for most people that come through our program, there's about 3 things that they don't want to do that are going to be very important for them to do to recover. And how well they do long term is going to be based on doing those 3 things. And in Elijah's case, he didn't want to do them, but he did them. He said, God has told me to do them. I don't know why I need to do this. I don't want to do this, but I'm doing it because God told me. Did he recover from his depression? He not only recovered, he ended up establishing the school of the prophets after that. The school that Weimar has modeled itself after and other schools. And he ended up being translated without seeing death. The man who was so depressed and wanted to die is the one God picked to never die. And that tells us that God has tremendous sympathy and compassion for those that have depression. He wants us to get to the root of it. He wants us to do the things that will help us to recover. And what a blessing in Elijah's case of being one of the most severely depressed individuals who never did taste death. Ellen White says, even the thoughts must be brought in subjection to the will of God, and the feelings under the control of what? Reason and religion. Our imagination was not given us to be allowed to run riot and have its own way without any effort at restraint and discipline. If the thoughts are wrong, what else will be wrong? The feelings will be wrong. And the thoughts and feelings combined make up the moral character. So, Romans tells us how we're transformed. Be transformed how? By the renewing of your mind. So you not only have to analyze your thoughts for distortions, which most people don't ever do. And that's one of the things we teach them. Don't just think NATs. NATs stand for negative automatic thoughts, where we're not even analyzing them. Stop yourself. Analyze your thoughts. Look for distortions in those thoughts. And then correct those thoughts. And that's how we're transformed, by the renewing of our mind. Ellen White says self-discipline must be practiced. An ordinary mind, well-disciplined, will accomplish more and higher work than will the most highly educated mind and the greatest talents without self-control. This woman here tried to commit suicide 5 times before coming to our program. The 4th time, a little bit of background on her. She was raised by parents who had become Adventists, and they put her in one of our universities. And it was one of the universities that had a dress code at that time, and she violated the dress code more than once and was brought in for disciplinary action, and she decided that she was going to have nothing more to do with God or Christianity or Adventism. She finished her nursing degree in another location, became a nurse, an ICU nurse, actually a pretty good ICU nurse. And she was diagnosed with depression, ADHD, all sorts of things. She was on multiple medicines. And she had also had an alcohol problem and also had a problem in regards to not healthy relationships with men. And with all of that combined, severe depression. She did get over her alcohol for a while, but when she went back to it, she realized, boy, I'm just terrible. I can't even show up to work and all of that. So she went out on her back porch, took a loaded gun, pulled the trigger, couldn't get the gun to work. The trigger jammed. And she was put in a psychiatric institution. She was on Xanax as well at that time and was taken off the Xanax because Xanax can kill you if you take it at an overdose. So they took that out from under her, but so quickly that she ended up having hallucinations and all sorts of things, and kind of a terrible time in that psych ward, and they had to actually put her back on benzos before they discharged her. And after she was discharged, she then tried another technique in a hotel room. I won't go into how she tried that because it's a highly successful way for a lot of people to end their life. But she was found 3 days later in that hotel room, and she was able to wake up. And she was from Texas. I was actually speaking in Texas at the time they found her, and her mother had a friend at the conference that I was speaking at and said, ask Dr. Nedley if he would take her. And I said, well, have her call. And is she going to be too severe for you? I said, no, it sounds like a lot of people we've treated. So, if she's alive and well and has a brain, and a brain that can change, we can work with her. And she was alive, and her brain was still functioning, and she could still change. So she came to our program. However, I don't know that her brain was working very clearly at first, because she didn't seem to know that it was going to be a religious institution, Weimar University. And she also didn't seem to know that she wasn't going to be able to smoke and use her drugs and those sorts of things there. And so she wanted to leave shortly after coming. She said her mother told her it was going to be a spa, so she thought she was going to be staying at a spa for a few weeks. As she was packing her bag, or not even packing, hadn't even unpacked and was going to leave, the CBT counselor, she wasn't scheduled with her, the administrator put her with her right away and said, you look like you're coming off something, or, why are you so jumpy and things? And she says, actually, I need a smoke. She says, well, don't tell Dr. Nedley, but go out in the woods and have a smoke and come back and talk to me. So she went out and had her tobacco cigarette and came back and was calmed down a little bit and was willing to stay that night. And we had issues with her every day. Day 6 is when we have the burning. This is where they put into the fire things that they've had insight on that they don't want to get out of the fire anymore. And she actually put meat in the fire. She was convinced on the plant-based diet studies and how it would help her brain. She put her tobacco in the fire and all the nicotine, and she put her relationships with men in the fire. And so we realized something's getting through with that girl, because they decide what they're going to put in the fire themselves. But then the next morning she wanted to leave. And they said the counselor isn't going to work, the spiritual counselor isn't going to work, none of us are going to work. If she's going to stay, you're going to have to come over here, Dr. Nedley, and talk to her. So I said, she has her bag. She had called an Uber to pick her up. I said, where are you going, Christy? I'm done here with the program. No, the program is not over with. And she says, well, I just don't want to be here anymore. And I said, so where are you going to go? She goes, I'm going to check myself into a local motel. I said, you can't do that. She says, I thought this program was voluntary. I said, it is voluntary until it becomes involuntary. She says, what do you mean? I said, I know what you do in local hotels, and I can't let you go there. Well, I need to go. I've got to go. I said, there's only one other place you can go. And I says, that's the Sacramento Psychiatric Hospital. And she says, well, I'll fit in there. Go ahead and take me there. I said, Christy, you've been there. You've been to psychiatric hospitals. You know what they're going to do. Do you want to go through that again? She says, well, at least I'll be around staff that have tattoos. And at that point, the director of our program asked me, whispered and came up and said, should I show her my tattoo? I said, no. Don't show her your tattoo. I said, this is not about tattoos. And so I said, one of the other people started to talk to her, and I pulled away to call the next of kin, because this is like an ICU emergency. So her next of kin was her parents. She didn't have a husband. She had a child, but no husband, but the child was young. So I called the parents, and they said, Dr. Nedley, whatever you can do to keep her there, we know that's what's going to help her. Keep her there. Now, not every parent would have said that, but with them saying that, I told one of our workers to go out to the Weimar gate and tell the Uber he's no longer needed. And I went back to talk with her, and I said, so Christy, what harm have we done to you? She says, that's a good question. She says, you haven't done me any harm. I said, if there's no harm being done, why don't you stay and get the complete program? So she went back to her room, and I told my staff, and we have a very loving staff as demonstrated by this, I said, actually, we still need to take her to the Sacramento Psychiatric Facility because we don't have 24/7 supervision. You can, if you're actively suicidal, you can't be in our program. You can have suicidal thoughts where you don't have a plan and you're not going to carry it out, but you can't be actively suicidal. And she was exhibiting that. So I said, if you hear any movement, and the only way we can keep her here is if you guys rotate and have your ear to the door, and if you hear any movement, you walk into that room. And so one nurse and one medical assistant, one of them stayed up 4 hours in the middle of the night, and the other 4 hours with the ear to the door, no sound whatsoever. And she woke up refreshed, and she was cooperative for the final 3 days. But when we evaluated her a day before discharge, before the usual discharge, it was clear, although she was doing a lot better, she was still not ready for reentry. And I said, Christy, you're not ready to go home. I'm going to suggest you stay an extra week. About 20% of our patients do have to stay an extra week. And she says, is that a have to? And I said, actually, you even circled this, and it's clear that you're no longer suicidal. You don't even want it. It's not even on your radar screen to be thinking about death or any of that. And it has been that way for days now. And so I can't keep you here against your will, but I'm highly recommending it. So she said, I'll think about it. And the next morning, she said she was going home. And she went home, and I said, I think you're going to need us again. You know where we're at. And as she was going home, as it turns out, she had already went against one of her things, because there was a guy she met at one of the psychiatric facilities that wanted to celebrate the end of her 10 days and had asked her on this date. And so she wanted to go back with him. But she was doing other things like the diet and exercise. And where she was living was in a place called Bethesda. And when she was running, it had this written on the big water tower, but the only part she could see was SDA. And she ran past the house of a doctor that we told her that lived in her neighborhood that she should connect with, and he also was an SDA. And she says, I think I'm running away from God. I need to go back to Weimar. And so she called to see if she could come back a week later. And so we accepted her back. And she was the most cooperative that you could imagine. And although we didn't have a formal program at that point, so it took longer, it was a couple of weeks that she had to be with us. Near the end of the second week, by the way, at the end of the first week, she says, you people are so loving and kind here. I just love this place. And she says, I didn't think I would want to have anything to do with God. By the way, that's what she told the counselor as well. I don't want to have anything to do with God. God is in this place. I don't want to have anything to do with God. And now the second week, the first week after she's back, she says, can someone give me Bible studies? And so our nurse gave her Bible studies. And at the end of the second week, as we're getting ready, the weekend is coming up. And so we did a whole nother evaluation on her. And so I looked at all the results of that, and I said, Christy, do you think you're ready to go home? And she said, I'm not going to say what I think. I'm going to only follow what you say I'm ready for. I said, well, Christy, my evaluation shows that you are ready to go home. Tears started coming down her face, and she said, I was hoping you wouldn't say that. I love this place. I don't want to leave. But she got baptized on that weekend at Moses Rock. And this girl has gone back. She's depression-free. She's anxiety-free. She's on no ADHD drugs. And she got a raise as a nurse. She then became the charge nurse, then became the director of nurses of the hospital. And now she's putting on community depression and anxiety recovery programs. And with one program starting, she started a church. And that church now has 80 members. And they run depression and anxiety recovery programs all the time. So she's planted a church. And her dream is to come back to Weimar and work as a nurse practitioner. She's now getting her nurse practitioner in our psychiatric facility. And so someone that the devil almost had thought he had her in a grasp. But any brain can change. If Christy's brain can change, any brain can change. And she says, I don't even recognize, I don't even know that person I was when I came there. She goes, when I hear about the stories of me coming there, it's like, who is that? I don't even know that person. And she has such a full and happy life. The power of right thought is more precious than the golden wedge of Ophir. By the way, she's married a nice young man who is just as much of a team member in depression and anxiety recovery as she is. He's seen how she has changed in all of that, and he's a partner with her in all of that. Power of right thought, more precious than the golden wedge of Ophir. So if you have the opportunity to get the golden wedge of Ophir, but think right thoughts instead, which should you choose? Right thoughts. Emotional intelligence, it can be improved upon. Ye shall what? Know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Any questions? We have until, what time was I supposed to end? Does anyone know? It lasts until 3? Oh, 3:30, so I'm over. So we won't, I don't know if we'll have time for questions or not. When does the next seminar begin? 3:45, all right, maybe 2 questions till 3:40, yes.
Why not having some serotonin and dopamine pills or putting in the tea in the morning and solve the problem in the brain?
All right, great question. Since there's serotonin deficits a lot of times with depression as far as serotonin activity depression, why don't we just put serotonin pills in a cup of tea and drink that in the morning, or dopamine pills in the tea? By the way, we can give even IV dopamine, which we do in the ICU, and it won't lift depression. Why doesn't it lift depression? We could give IV serotonin. It wouldn't work. Those molecules are too big to cross the blood-brain barrier. They have to be made inside the brain. They don't get there from the outside. So we have to give them the nutrients and the lifestyle that'll help them to produce that. Now, what happens with the serotonin reuptake inhibitors or the other inhibitors is they're producing serotonin activity not by giving you more serotonin. You can't produce one more serotonin molecule by taking those drugs, nor does it build up any receptors. How does it work? It plugs the vacuum cleaner of the releasing neuron. So when serotonin gets released, there's supposed to be serotonin activity, then it's vacuumed back up so that it can be used again. The drugs prevent the serotonin from being vacuumed back up. Why? Because there's a shortage of it, and if it prevents it from going back, then it might produce serotonin activity. That's a short-term gain and a long-term problem because now you can't reuse the serotonin. And now you have to make even more of it. So that's why these drugs often a year later you have just as bad a depression. It worked at first, but now you're needing higher doses, then you're needing other things, and no one has actually looked at why is this patient not making the serotonin. And of course that's what we look at, and so we're able to fix the defect of why that serotonin wasn't being made. And then they can store that serotonin and then have adequate serotonin activity that will be far superior to taking a vacuum cleaner plugger, which is essentially what these medicines are. All right, well, thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.